All right, so there was something I mentioned very briefly in some of my videos on Kogarasu Maru, Little Crow's Beak profile Japanese-style swords, but I never demonstrated it. But recently, sword friend Shane, and Matthew Jensen, if you're watching, the fact that so many people are using your terms, cheers, my friend. Anyway, back to the topic. He was thinking about getting something like this and was concerned with, among other things, doing Noto, re-sheathing with a sword with a sharp back edge. Now, these are becoming more common coming out of Chinese forges. They didn't used to be, so therefore not a lot of people have really addressed using them. I also heard some people really don't like them, either aesthetically or because they feel like, you know, the structure, especially with the way traditional Japanese swords are forged in the metallurgy, this thinner section with this double-edged could be more prone to bending or breaking. Well, some of the monosteels or other forging techniques coming out of those Chinese forges, so far I haven't had any problems, but I do treat it a little bit more gingerly in the cut, kind of like I treat a Chinese gen or double-edged European sword. So think about that. But if you're familiar with those types of swords or other kinds of swords that do have partial back edges or false edges, you know that, well, this kind of opens up a whole new world of possibilities. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. I promise I'm adding that to my to-do list of videos. But the concern, again, from Shane is re-sheathing safely. If you're using the most common kind of Noto or some variation of it, there are certainly a number of variations, depending on your Koryu, or instructor, or whatever, or even personal preferences. All right, with a more common Shinogi Zukiri, Uchigatana, there will be some variation of this, using your left hand, both the web of your hand between your thumb and forefinger, and your index finger, to grasp the scabbard mouth, the koiguchi, and then carefully feed the sword home. Now, some people start making contact with the sword here, some people will change the angle or the rotation of the saya. Again, several different ways to do it, but the idea is, yeah, the spine of the sword is making contact with your hand in a couple of different places, which allows you to return the sword home without having to look down at it. You see, I'm still looking at the camera, and this is part of the practice of meditative awareness, situational awareness, Zan Shin. Also looks really cool, right? Stylish. However, if I try to do that with this, I'm going to be bleeding. So what do I have to do differently? All right, I'm going to show you 3 different methods that you can use to re-sheath a sword like this. Now, caveats to get out of the way always. I don't consider myself any kind of expert master, anything like that, but I've been doing this for a long time. And in terms of re-sheathing a Kogarasu Maru, which is just a sword that I happen to enjoy working with, partly I had to figure this out by myself, and partly I had to apply techniques that I learned from other kinds of swords, including Chinese gen and even European swords. So, I don't know if you're being taught any way to re-sheath a Kogarasu Maru, but caveat number 2, as always, I have no intention of contradicting anything that you're being taught, learning, or practicing. If you got something that's working for you, you stick with it. Hopefully I'm just adding something useful to the conversation, or maybe filling a void where, you know, nobody else is addressing it. Who knows? Like I said, I plan to do a little bit more on the use of the Kogarasu Maru. Soon, I promise. Now, I have to add now caveat number 3, which is usually don't try this stuff at home. I am in no way, shape, or form anything you would call a professional, because there are elements of danger. Well, just like the standard Noto, but more so. I'm going to show you 3 different methods in general, and they all have different levels of risk, from a little bit of danger to stupid dangerous. So, yeah, I can't really recommend that you do any of these, and if you do, slowly, carefully, and I would recommend safety equipment, which would actually include gloves, especially when you get your hand on some of those cut-proof gloves. Yeah, that would be wonderful. But again, really, really slow and carefully, because this is extra, extra dangerous. If you have, for instance, practiced Noto traditionally with a sword with a blunt spine, you probably started practicing with a bokken and then started, then with a blunt Iaido, maybe eventually working up to a sharp sword. Now some of us accelerated that process and decided we wanted to go a little quicker to sharp swords, or worked our way up there, and certainly, hopefully, we recognized the danger. Well, now that danger's kind of doubled. So before I proceed, be aware of that. I am now going to start with what I consider the safest but least graceful method, and I've actually learned to use this with all sorts of different kinds of swords. I actually learned it not only with Chinese swords but with European style swords, and I call it the belly method. Now I'm going to show all of these from this distance so you can kind of see my whole body, well, at least from here up, and then I'm going to show them close up, and then we'll discuss at the end. All right, so the belly method, again, this is what I consider the safest. Now, I certainly recommend that you be wearing a shirt or something thicker than a shirt. A jacket, it could be a uniform like the top of a gi or something like that. Something that's going to give your abdomen a little protection. Because basically what you're going to have to do is look down at the scabbard tip, and it's a variation of the simplest thing you could do, which would be simply pointing the tip back into the scabbard and feeding it home, right? Now, I'm going for a little extra stability in this method because my hand is, way up here. I may not be very stable and I might risk stabbing myself in the belly or the hand. To reduce that, I will rest the flat of my sword on my body, on my stomach, and then look down briefly to line these two things up and put them away. Now, this works just as well with a sword that's worn edge down from a hanger or something like that. So when you see me re-sheathing something like a Gen or a European sword or something like that, you're probably going to see me doing that. It doesn't have that same kind of zanshin. Hopefully I don't have to look down for more than a second. But let's take a closer look at it. All right, close up of the belly method. Yeah, I'm out of shape. I slacked off during the heat wave. But does having more of a gut help with this one? I'm not sure. I'm going to say that it does, just to make myself feel better. But definitely, as I said, wear a shirt, preferably something thick enough to protect you. I'm doing this actually with a fairly thin shirt because I'm used to it. Don't recommend doing that until you're really, really comfortable with this technique. But as I said, it actually works for, well, pretty much any kind of sword, edge up, edge down, hanger, belt wear, whatever. What again I'm doing is I'm going to lay the flat of the sword against my body. This allows me to stabilize the tip so I don't have to do all the work with my right hand, which is way out here. I'm going to then look down at least briefly and line these two things up like I'm docking a couple of spaceships in orbit, and then feed the tip in very carefully and sheath it. It's not graceful, it's not stylish, but it works. All right, method number 2, the stupid dangerous one, which would of course be my favorite. Why? Because it's the closest to a traditional Noto, so something I'm familiar with. That also, however, adds even more danger to it, because if I'm going a little too fast and start relying on motor memory, I might forget I'm doing it with a sword with a sharp back edge and wind up having a bloody accident. But even doing it with this method, getting back to that caveat number 3, don't try this at home. I'm not what anyone would call a professional. This is something I had to develop on my own over a period of many years based on not only traditional Noto, but working with other kinds of swords in training. And even now, it's still, I would consider, extremely high risk of drawing blood. If you were practicing any kind of Noto with a sword, I would always recommend, always, safety, safety, safety. Start with a blunt weapon, a bokken, then an Iaido. If you're going to start working your way up slowly but surely, work with an instructor. Getting into a sharp sword, great idea to start with, is a protective glove. And also, even though, yeah, the form is, to maintain that eye contact, that zanshin, now, if you're going to be starting to learn, go ahead and look down. Until you get a feel for it, yeah, let your eyes help you. But yeah, I'm not going to do that because I've been doing it for a while. That doesn't necessarily make me safe, though, doing this. So again, Don't recommend it. You're probably going to see me doing it, so at least let me give you a sense of what it is I'm doing, taking literally my hand into my hands. What are the changes I have to make this safer? Not safe, but safer. First of all, you're going to see this, well, a lot better in the close-up. I'm going to extend my index finger. Okay. Now, it's diagonally out, but it's basically range of motion for me, so I'm just going to straighten it. Now, when I bring my sword around to do Noto, I commonly always make contact with my hand about the lower third. This is definitely going to help because on a sword like this, the lower third spine is blunt. But what I'm going to do is not rest the spine on my finger. I'm going to rest the flat, and not here, but I'm actually going to rest it between the lower two knuckles. You'll see this again better on the close-up. For me, there's a little depression in here. Depending on how your hand is built, how big and meaty it is, or whatever, this may not work at all. So be aware of that. What I'm going to do is, with the flat of my sword in that spot, I'm going to slowly and carefully slide, even more carefully when I know I'm in the sharp spot. Again, I've got way less than 1 millimeter clearance between my skin and razor sharp edges. Yeah, this is something I've had to practice for a long time just to become remotely comfortable with, and still it's high risk. I'm going to do this until I feel that tip transition, and then you'll see my index finger curl under and catch, again, the side of the tip. So many sharp edges in here. I'm going to use that to feed it into the koiguchi. Once I've got it in there, I'm going to immediately pull it way out of the way again, straighten it back out to slide the sword home. And I kept eye contact, kind of similar to a traditional one. Well, let me show it to you just a little bit faster before we get to the close-up. So, bring the sword over, flat into the index finger that's extended, slide slowly, carefully. Catch the tip, and home with my finger out of the way. No blood is a good day. Let's look a little closer. All right, let me try to give you the close-up view. Again, if I try to do my Noto as I normally would with a sword with a blunt spine, by the time I get to the sharp edge, I'm risking cutting both the space between my thumb and forefinger, that web, and also the forefinger itself as I feed the tip into the koiguchi. Now, if I'm working with a Kogarasu Maru and I forget, and I'm on muscle memory, and I go back to, well, the common way, I get a nasty surprise. So have to concentrate, have to take it slow, remind myself what I'm doing. What do I do differently? Again, first thing I'm going to do is point my index finger away from the koiguchi. It's a little bit unnatural, but yeah, this is what I'm going for. I'm also going to raise it up a little bit. What I'm looking to create is a shelf that I can put not the spine of the sword, but the flat, the side of the sword. Basically what I'm trying to do is rest it in the depression between the lower two knuckles. And my camera's not cooperating with me. There we go. Okay, so basically there. And I want to take this really slowly. You can actually carefully practice this. Again, I recommend you do this with a glove, a cut-proof glove if you can get one, so that you can kind of run the sword flat across the side of your finger and not slice yourself. It depends on how meaty your fingers are. You may not be able to do this safely. So proceed again with extreme caution. But what I'm trying to do is use that flat to guide it until basically I can catch, again, the side of the tip. But look at what I'm grabbing. It's the side of the tip with my finger, and then carefully feed it into the koiguchi. One more time, just a little bit quicker. I'm going to bring it up here, bring it across my finger, and in. Now, one of the things you're probably noticing is I got a lot more flesh, which is potentially greasy and acidic, on bare blade, so yeah, gonna have to clean it. All right, method 3 is my least favorite, and it's about medium dangerous, but I figured I'd show it to you because you might find it useful. This is one I specifically learned from traditional styles of Chinese Gen. Now, if you're familiar with the kind of practice that's usually done in Taiji or even some Kung Fu schools, no scabbard is involved. So this would be you putting the sword away at the end of practice. This could also be with a Ming or Qing style Gen that's hung from a fairly long hanger, so you could pull it up into this kind of vertical position slightly away from your body. I have trouble doing this with the scabbard wedged into my belt, and again, you'll see the details better in the close-up. But big picture, what I'm doing is I'm going to, and for the sake of what I normally do with all different kinds of swords that I do this with, usually in double-edged swords, I will turn, in this case, the top edge of the saya away from me. So, towards my fingers, kurigata on the inside of my hand. I'm going to make sure that my hand is very slightly, at least, below the koiguchi for safety. You're going to see why in the close-up. My thumb is going to come up and go halfway over the scabbard mouth. All right, again, you're going to see it better in the close-up. I'm going to bring my sword over the top, rest the spine on the scabbard mouth up against my finger, and very, very slowly and carefully and gently draw it across until my finger feels the transition, my thumb feels the transition to the tip. Carefully feed it in and send it home. Now, can I do it with the sword facing the other way? Yeah, I'll go ahead and show that to you and show it to you again in the close-up. Again, make sure my hand is below, that was too high up, it puts it in danger, below the level of koiguchi for protection. Thumb comes up, definitely helps if you've got a long fingernail or gloves on. Spine up against here, you're going to see it better in the close-up. Slide across. Remember which way the scabbard's facing. Turn it. Slide it home. Now, if it's a double-edged sword, it doesn't really matter so much which way the scabbard's facing. But yeah, with a sword like this, absolutely does. Let's look closer. All right, close-up of my least favorite way, but again, the way I learned traditionally with a Gen. Now, you can do this with your sword on a long hanger, or just free in your hand upright like this. I really am not comfortable with doing this with my sword in my belt, because I favor having enough range of motion to move this around, as you're going to see. With the sword, well, you'll notice my upper arm is up against my body for stability, but my lower arm is free and the sword is about a little bit away from my body. Less than a foot, certainly, but a comfortable distance for having your arm in this position. You're also going to notice that you can see the koiguchi above the side of my index finger at all times. If my hand gets up here, yeah, it's going to get sliced. Let the koiguchi protect you. Now, there's two ways to do it. I tend to do this more often. It's kind of in a natural position if you're used to wearing your katana edge up, but I turn the top of the scabbard facing away from me. So the edge is facing that way. It means the kurigata is on the inside of my hand. But what I'm going to do, I take my thumb and I'm going to cover about half the scabbard. Now, it certainly helps to have long fingernails, which I don't. It also helps to be wearing a glove, which I'm not. So, yeah, there's a little bit of danger here. So, again, take it slow and carefully and use the safety precautions that I'm not using. Now, you can start with the blunt part of the spine, and basically what I'm doing is, if you can see, is I'm using my thumb as kind of a slide. So it's pressing against the koiguchi and it's pressing a little bit gently against my thumb. But I find once I get the sharp edge on there, I get a little bit of a bind that helps me guide it all the better. Now, I don't want to press down. I want to be really slow and gentle, because this will indeed potentially gouge your koiguchi with repetition. It's another reason I don't like it. And if you've got a metal koiguchi, well, it's going to blunt your sword. So yeah, it's not the best sheathing method, but I figured I'd show it to you because it was one I was taught to use with a straight sword. You're going to use this to, again, carefully guide that, and then your thumb hopefully will be able to feel the transition of the angle into the tip, which will then allow you to kind of feed that in, and again, very carefully line everything up in sheath. What if I do it with the edge facing the other way? Is it a big difference? Well, no, I'll go rotate it around. Now the edge is facing towards me, as it would if I was wearing it edge up, Uchigatana style. Kuragata is facing, well, outside of my hand towards you. Going to do the same thing. Make sure that, again, my finger is below the scabbard mouth. Thumb goes across about half of it. Lay the blade carefully in there. Slide slowly and smoothly. Wait for the transition. I have to turn the sword differently, so I have to know which way my scabbard's facing, or this is going to be an uncomfortable disaster. Get my finger out of the way. Carefully resheath everything. Alright, so what'd you think? Now you're probably already asking, why am I showing you something this dangerous? Well, if you own a Kogarasu Maru, or you're planning on buying a Kogarasu Maru, you're going to need to put it away. So yeah, I figure you're probably going to be experimenting with this stuff on your own because, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of instructors working with these. They're not featured in a lot of traditional Koryu. So you got a lot of practitioners kind of fumbling around in the dark. So I figured I'd give you a couple of options, and there's certainly other ones. There's absolutely nothing wrong with simply taking the scabbard out of your belt, giving yourself plenty of room and protection, using your eyes to put it away, okay? Or my second recommendation would be the first one that I showed you, where resting it up against your body, in this case you'll notice the tip is even pointed away from me, and then feeding it in, right. That would be what I recommend you do, because that is by far the safest. Not entirely safe. Working with a sharp sword is never entirely safe. But yeah, high risk. So, if you're thinking about a Kogarasu Maru, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I promise to do more videos on this kind of sword. If you already have one, let's get that conversation started. Let's compare notes. Do you have method or methods that work? And as always, well, going to add stay safe, but thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for more.